Hi, I'm John Vorparian, and this is Beyond the Game. What's the connection between baseball and music? Well, my guest tonight can certainly talk about that second topic. They're both stars from the music world. Indeed, it's a pleasure to have back Bob Thompson. Bob is involved with the Baseball Music Project, and Dave Gluck is a jazz drummer extraordinaire. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dave Gluck and Bob Thompson to Beyond the Game.
Thanks, John.
Now, you guys are here because you supposedly wrote a book with New York Yankees.
We did.
Yeah, Rhythms of the Game. Tell me more.
Well, it's the book is co-authored. It comes out during the All-Star break, July 2011. It's called Rhythms of the Game: The Link Between Musical and Athletic Performance. And we've had the great pleasure of working with Bernie the past 3 years. He was actually a student at SUNY Purchase College, where we are both professors. And so this book explores that relationship between music and baseball.
Wow. And let me ask you about music and baseball. Is there a particular concept, or there's several concepts, I believe, in the book that you articulated? Is it it's a 9-section book? Hey, there are 9 innings to a game.
It's a double header, actually. There's about 18, 20, it's 2.5 games worth of material.
Let me chime in here for a second. When you think about a baseball player and a musician, indeed, I think the first commonality is they're both performing. They're just simply performing on different venues. One is performing on a field or a court or a rink. The other one is typically on a concert stage. But it's that same mentality. You are performing to the best of your ability, hopefully, in front of people, in front of a public. And it's that mindset in terms of how to prepare for that big moment.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about, in fact, one of the first chapters is this thing we call the matrix moment. And what we learned is that the most elite athletes and performers have this extraordinary gift in those moments. You think of Bernie Williams, bottom of the 11th inning, the ALCS Game 1, 1996, between the Baltimore Orioles and the New York Yankees. The game is tied. Bernie gets up to bat. In that moment, most of us, if we were at the batter's box, in the batter's box, we'd be absolutely terrified. If you were Paul Simon, whom we talked to in the book, he wrote the foreword, if you were on stage, 500,000 people in Central Park, what would you feel in that moment? Most of us would be terrified, petrified, whatever you can think of. But in those extraordinary moments, those elite athletes are calm, relaxed, and extremely focused. It's this actually state of hyper-focus that allows them to achieve that genius moment that we all have gotten to observe.
Other people who have analyzed this moment have called it like being in the zone. It's a very popular sports term. Or like a peak performance. We decided to call it the Matrix moment, that movie back in 1999 starring Keanu Reeves, the Matrix moment where he's in battle, elevated in the air, and time stops. You know, Bernie Williams has described that moment where time almost stops and you have complete ownership of that moment.
Yeah.
Time stops, and also that ball, whether it's coming at you at 85 miles per hour or 95, it's coming at you so slow that you can actually analyze the rotation of the ball, and it's as big as a beach ball.
Yeah, and we found that commonality in talking to a lot of great musicians and ball players. In those moments, time actually kind of slows down, and there's a psychological study behind that. One of the people in our book is a well-known music and sports psychologist, Dr. Don Green, who talks about in that state, elite athletes and musicians, their brainwaves actually slow down. So that's why when you hear a batter saying, "Yeah, the ball was the size of a beach ball," well, it makes perfect sense.
All right, now let me see if I understand this Matrix moment, and I'm gonna utilize you guys because even though you didn't wear the pinstripes, although I'm not so certain Dave there with that.
I bought this yesterday.
But you ask athletes, "Hey, do you hear the crowd?" Now, Dave, I understand that you play the bongos, percussion drums, and you've done it with such entities as the Boston Pops and the Dallas Symphony and like. And Dave, you play with a couple of guys called Sinatra and Bennett and Moody Blues and all. But do you hear the crowd, or have you been in the zone? And if so, can you relate that moment?
You want to go first?
I think you know, in those moments, yeah, the difference between a Bernie Williams at bat and a Bernie Williams on stage is that when he's on stage performing, he's letting the crowd in. But I think what you'll find is for baseball players, the thing that we learn is this ability to hyper-focus and block out that noise. In fact, one of the things that Bernie talked about is he was playing in Fenway, and out in center field, not the friendliest place on the planet for a New York Yankee.
Perhaps the most hostile.
A hostile place on the planet for a New York Yankee. And he was in a slump, and actually used the crowd, you know, jeering at him as
fuel.
As fuel.
Yeah.
So it's that ability where most people would pretty much crumble in that situation. He's able to use it positively.
Yeah, in picking up what Bob is getting to, let me just quickly tell you a story about me preparing for a couple of my recitals when I was in college. My professor, I thought it was an absurd request, but he says, you know something, why don't we bring in a boombox to the practice room and start listening to like AM radio while you're practicing? That AM radio basically sort of took the place of perhaps 50,000 people, you know, to do one of two things: to actually get used to hearing distractions and to overcoming distractions, or to tune them out, so that you're actually sort of preparing for that moment where you're going to inevitably have tons of distractions.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned Fenway, Bob, and I'm curious, in the book, there's a couple of names that are thrown about. What's the connection? Pedro Martinez and David Ortiz.
Well, you know, fans, any Yankee fans listening to this, of course, the rivalry between the Red Sox and the Yankees is, you know, that is the rivalry in baseball. The fact is off the field, there's a very cordial relationship between the Yankees fans and Yankee players and Red Sox players. For Bernie Williams, his arch nemesis on the mound was Pedro Martinez, whom they have a wonderful relationship now, but at the time, great competitors. And the thing that Bernie talked about with respect to Pedro that made him such a great pitcher was his ability to think across time. And the analogy to that is a saxophonist like John Coltrane, who when he picks up the saxophone and starts improvising a solo, he's not thinking over the short term, 4 or 8 bar phrases. He's actually able to conceptualize over, you know, an entire solo. Pedro Martinez had that gift. From the first pitch in the game, he was composing, you know, composing a composition over 9 innings, and he would never throw to the same, you know, batter the same pitch. And it was pure brilliance. And very few pitchers have that gift of to see across time and to actually compose, like Beethoven would compose a symphony in 3 or 4 movements.
With that said, one of the contributors to the book, Susan Waldman, who is a radio announcer for the New York Yankees, we had a really nice, friendly talk with her on the phone. Bob and I did, and she referred to Pedro Martinez on the mound and Bernie at the plate as being this paso doble, this dance, you know, very artistic. This you know, where a sporting event between two, you know, players becomes artistic, and it becomes a dance, if you will. And on top of that, a chess game, trying to out-strategize the other person. Think one step ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing that we started to come away with working with Bernie is that the highest level of athleticism really transcends athleticism, and it becomes art. I mean, it's an art form to watch, you know, Derek Jeter making those, you know, backhanded plays, watching, you know, Roberto Alomar,
or a Michael Jordan, or
Michael
Wayne
Jordan.
Gretzky.
It transcends sport. It's art.
Well, here's something about music and baseball that sort of, I'm going to just throw it out there and you guys attack it or embrace it. Baseball, you're at the plate, you hit the ball, you got to run to first. In music, isn't it that you may play a note or play the composition and then decide, hey, wait a minute, there might be a better way or a variation to do that? Doesn't sports limit an artist's creation, so to speak? Or
that's a well, you know, the interesting thing about music, like if you're a jazz musician and you're a ball player, you're dealing with constant variables. Everything can change. You're responding off of the drummer, the bass player, the pianist. So it's this constant state. It's like one big, long, improvised drum solo. And one of the things we learned from Bernie is that the greatest ball players have this ability to, be on the bandstand and see the entire scene, and as things change, if the bass player is playing a certain, to respond off of that. And it's sort of that 360 vision.
Yeah, and Bob, with that said, that's a nice segue to go into this, something that Bob and I discovered writing this book, is that there is a definitive difference between talking about a person's intuition and a person's instinct. What Bob is getting at is these great players and musicians develop great intuition, and that's through, I think, having had a ton of experience in a situation where you can now start to analyze the situation and do a little bit of prediction, precognition. And someone like Jeter or Jordan or Wayne Gretzky had great intuition as opposed to someone who has instinct. We all have instinct. Instinct is more of a physical involuntary response to a situation. Get out of the way of the ball if it's coming at my helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we noticed. Like, there's that great play where Jeter, I think it was the Yankees versus Oakland, Jeter's running across the field to the first base line to get the ball that was overthrown and backhands it to Posada and gets Jeremy Giambi out at the plate. In those moments, how does one, how does one create those genius moments? It's about having prepared for that moment, but at a certain level, it's something that is almost like jazz and art.
It's improvised.
It's improvised.
It's instinctual.
Yeah.
Because they don't practice a play like that.
Yeah.
So he was thinking outside the box, and that's when being an athlete at that moment cerebrally becomes artistic.
Yeah.
Now, Dave, outside of Rhythms of the Game, writing the book with Bob and Bernie, you've also performed with Bernie on his second album, Moving Forward. Can you talk a little bit about?
Bob mentioned Bob mentioned that Bernie came up to purchase to become a student, and that coincided with him putting together his second recording called Moving Forward. And actually, the name of the CD is also the name of the title cut, which was actually an assignment that I gave him based on an African rhythm. So I must say I'm a little bit proud of that moment. But Bernie was nice enough to, I actually did a little bit of recording on the album, marimba, chimes, timpani, some larger orchestral percussion instruments. But when he had his CD release party down at the Nokia Theater in Times Square a couple of years ago, I think it was April 2008, I believe, or 2009, I'm not sure. But he had me up there playing with him some African log drums. It was a great pleasure for me.
The thing, everybody who's a Yankees fan knows that Bernie's, a musician. I think the thing that really surprised us getting to work with him, both as musicians, and professors, is just how talented he is. I mean, if Bernie had spent the past 16 years applying himself to music, but he has this amazing innate talent on the instrument.
And then it's funny, Bob mentions that, and you talked about moving forward, and there's a chapter towards the end of the book that is indeed called Moving Forward. And I think what Bob is touching upon is once you realize you have skills and natural talent in one facet of your life, perhaps those skills can be applied to another facet of your life. And I think Bernie is a quintessential example of that. And hopefully that's one of the morals of the story of this book, is really analyze the skills you have over here and let's see if they can be applied to something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was reading some of the